Tom and Lori had been married almost 5 years and had never had a chance to take any time off for an extended vacation due to college and careers. A few long weekends were the extent of things. So, when Tom's boss, Jacob, invited them on a camping trip with a group of his friends and their families, Tom and Lori jumped at the opportunity. Tom had been working for Jacob's computer consulting firm for about 3 years right out of college. Because they worked long hours together, Jacob and Tom became good friends despite their age difference. Jacob was 40 and Tom was only 27. The company was relatively young, so Tom was one of the senior members of their consulting team and reaped a lot of benefits, such as extra time off when things were slow, and Jacob often treated Tom and Lori to fancy meals or tickets to various shows. Over the years, Lori too became good friends with Jacob. The three of them would often do things on the weekends. Jacob was divorced and lived alone with his 19-year-old son, Matt. Matt was a tall, thin man that looked much younger than he was. He had just finished his first year of college and was home for the summer. It was a warm week in July when Jacob had planned the outing. He only invited 3 out of the 24 employees from the computer firm, so the firm's day-to-day business was easily controlled, even though the top 4 people in the company were going on the week-long camping trip with their boss and their families. The other people invited were some longtime friends of Jacob's along with their families. In all, there were about 15 groups, including couples and families, totaling 50 people including children. Jacob had reserved a large portion of a campground on a small lake for swimming, fishing, or boating. Plus there were plenty of woods for hiking. Most of the people set up in tents, although there were a couple had small campers. Tom and Lori had a medium-sized tent that they set up next to the one that Jacob and his son were staying in. After arriving the first day, Jacob and his son had a huge cookout for the entire group of people. Everyone mingled until late in the evening. Tom and Lori had a chance to meet some of Jacob's old friends, and Lori met the wives of the other 2 guys from work. In all, it was a very pleasant evening. The next day was bright, sunny, and warm. The people split off into various smaller groups. Some went hiking, others swimming. Tom and Lori spent the morning on the beach and swimming in the lake. After a quick lunch of sandwiches, they went back to their tent. Tom was sitting next to Lori, who was laying on her back. Tom asked, "Jacob rented a boat. He invited us to go for a ride with him and Matt and one of the other guys. We might try a little water skiing. Do you want to go?" Lori replied, "No, I'm kind of tired. I was thinking of taking a little nap. You can go if you want." "You sure? I don't want to leave you all alone. I'd just like to spend the day relaxing." She reached over and rubbed the front of his shorts. "Unless you'd like to have a little afternoon delight." Lori sat up and kissed Tom. He returned the kiss, which became more and more passionate, but then suddenly stopped. "I'm sorry. He's waiting for me down by the dock. Maybe when I get back." Lori put on a pouty face, acting hurt. Then she smiled. "That's fine. I was half kidding anyway." She realized that she was still wearing her bikini with a t-shirt over the top. "I do have to get out of these wet clothes though, so pull the outer flaps shut when you leave." Tom kissed her and departed. Lori pulled her damp t-shirt off and proceeded to remove her bikini. She tossed them on Tom's sleeping bag. She dug out a towel and used it to dry the last of dampness off of her wet body. She sat there as she started to brush her damp hair that clung to her forehead and down her back, trying to give it back a little of its maternal body. Then she reached for her clothes bag and dug out a bra and panties, a t-shirt, and a pair of cutoffs. She thought about putting them on, but decided that sleeping in the nude felt much better. She opened the air flaps on the tent for a little breeze, and making sure no one could see in, she laid back on top of her sleeping bag for her nap. About an hour later, Lori heard the zipper to the tent open. She was laying on her side, facing away from the door. She whispered, "Did you change your mind?" A shocked Jacob replied, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize." Although he had only seen her backside, Lori jumped up in surprise, revealing her entire body to Jacob. "What are you doing here?" Jacob stammered a reply. "Tom sent me up to ask if you wanted to join us." "Close the tent. I don't want everyone to see me naked." Jacob crawled into the tent, closing the flap behind him. Lori said, "I didn't mean for you to come in." She scrambled to cover herself, but the only thing nearby was her towel. It would have to do. She held it covering her. "Tom is taking another turn at skiing. He sent me to get you. He's out in the boat and won't be back for at least 20 minutes. So, I liked what I just saw. I haven't been with a woman in 5 years, so I wanted it to last a little longer." "Why so long?" "I'm too busy with the business. This is my first vacation in years, too," Jacob replied. "Well, I hope you enjoyed the show," Lori stated. "I did. I just wish it would have lasted longer." The tone in his voice made this last statement seem like a request, rather than just a comment. We're good friends since I already saw you, couldn't you just let me get another little peek? Jacob, I'm happily married. Tom is just down at the lake. He doesn't have to know. Just a look. That's all I'm asking. Lori assessed the situation. She didn't think it was a good idea. However, the idea of willingly showing herself to this older man who wanted so badly to see her was causing a slight stir within her. A little look couldn't be all that bad. No one would know, she tried to assure herself. Tom was her only lover and it was a good feeling to have another man longing for her body. Just a little look, Lori said as she slowly lowered the towel, letting it fall to her lap. Jacob sighed in appreciation. Very nice. Jacob said. Lori noticed that he had snuck a hand down to the front of his shorts. Now, the rest. Jacob commanded. Lori hesitated. Removing the towel would not only expose her but also her body would be fully open and exposed. Jacob reached over and started to pull the towel away, but Lori held it in place. He pleaded with his eyes for a moment. Then she gave in and he pulled the towel off, completely exposing her. Jacob sat back and ran his eyes up and down her body. It felt weird, but she kind of liked it. Lori stared straight forward, occasionally glancing at him. Okay, your turn, she said. For what? You're seeing me. I want to see what you've got. Jacob smiled and leaned back. He unzipped his shorts and pulled them off. He covered his lap with the towel, then slipped his briefs off. Go ahead, come and get your towel back. Lori smiled and crawled over to his side of the tent. In one swift movement, she ripped the towel from his lap. Lori gasped. See something you like? Jacob asked. Yes, I do. It's, quite large. She replied. She had never had any complaints about Tom's, but now staring, she started to wonder how different it would feel. Bigger than your husband, I take it. Yes. Well, I suppose, I should get dressed, unless you'd like to touch it. Lori figured she may not get the chance, so she thought that she should take advantage of the situation. She reached over and firmly grasped. It felt wonderful. Please, do it. Lori seldom did that with Tom. She just didn't feel right doing it, but right now, it felt kind of right. Her head sank. Taking a deep breath, Lori took as much as she could. Man, that's good. Lori bobbed a few more times, savoring the feeling. This is really feeling good, but we have limited time, so you'll have to finish that another time, but there's something else I want to do. Without waiting for a reply or asking permission, Jacob pushed Lori down onto her sleeping bag. In all the years they had been together, Tom had never did this, so this was a new experience for her, but she knew instantly that it was one that she would need often from now on. Jacob sat up and smiled down at her. Did you like that? God, yes. Are you sure? Jacob teased. Lori reached up and grabbed the front of the shirt Jacob still had on, pulling him downward. Shut up and do it. Jacob was shocked. A million thoughts ran through his mind, but in the end the only thing he could think of was, how could he possibly turn this down? Jacob positioned himself between Lori. The filled feeling was out of this world. Oh, you feel so good. Suddenly, Lori arched her back and finished. Jacob collapsed on top of her for a moment, catching his breath. I'll be glad to demonstrate that to you another time, but I guess I better go. He dressed quickly, as Lori pulled on her clothes. Jacob left. Lori did her best to straighten up the tent. She opened all the flaps to get the strong smell out of it. Then, she headed for the lake. As she approached the dock, Lori saw Jacob standing at the end, watching the boat with Tom and the others pull up. Tom jumped off and ran to Lori. That was great. We had a lot of fun. I had fun too, in my own way, she replied. Jacob approached the couple. Tom, I have a little problem. I need someone to run to the office and drop something off for me tomorrow morning. Would you mind going? Tom replied, why me? I promised Matt I'd go fishing with him first thing in the morning and the papers need to be there early. You'll be back before noon. I guess. Jacob smiled at Lori and winked. Lori, a couple of the women are going to town shopping in the morning. I'm supposed to ask if you like to go. Lori smiled and blushed, turning her face from Tom. I'd love to. She composes herself and turns back to Tom. There. I'll go shopping and you can run to the office. We can meet back here for lunch. Okay, fine. Anyone want to go back out? Matt called from the boat. Tom jumped back into the boat. Jacob whispered to Lori, meet me in my tent as soon as he leaves. Lori smiled and climbed into the boat. She was jetting excited from the thought of the next morning's encounter. Either way, she was happy. Lori had a fitful night of sleep in anticipation of what waited for her in Jacob's tent. Jacob, her husband's boss, had arranged this relaxing vacation for them along with about 15 other families. She had expected a nice quiet week, but instead it started off with a bang. While her husband, Tom, had been out water skiing the previous afternoon, Jacob had come to wake her from her nap and invite her down to the dock. However, he opened the tent and found Lori asleep on her sleeping bag. It was the first time in the 5 years since his divorce that he had been with a naked woman, especially a beautiful woman that was 13 years younger than his 40 years. So Jacob quickly got turned on. That led to him doing it with his right-hand man's wife. From Lori's point of view, it was some of the best she had ever had, though her experience was limited to that of her husband. Now, here it was, the next morning. Tom packed up the car and left by 8 o'clock. He had to go back to the city on a little work-related errand that Jacob had suddenly created. It was an hour to the office, an hour back, and guessing that he'd be there at least half an hour, simple math said that he would be gone until at least 10:30. So, as per the instructions that she was given, as soon as Tom's car pulled away, Lori crept out of the tent and over to the tent on the adjacent campsite. The one that Jacob was sharing with his 19-year-old son, Matt. She tapped on the outside of the tent. Jacob's voice came from inside, "Come in." Lori had dressed just as Jacob had asked her to. She wore a yellow sundress with thin straps over the shoulders. The material was very thin, so that it was apparent that she wasn't wearing anything underneath. Also, it was short enough that when she bent down to crawl into the tent, she had to be careful not to flash herself to anyone. She was glad to get into the tent as soon as possible to reduce the chance of anyone seeing her. Once inside, she was greeted by a wonderful sight. Jacob was lying on his back on his sleeping bag. Lori smiled. "Looks like you've been expecting me." "I've been like this since yesterday," Jacob laughed. "It was great and I can't wait to get started." Lori grabbed him and started. Jacob stroked Lori's hair. "I love it. That feels great." Lori said, "Glad you enjoy it. Tell me something. Have you ever been with two at once?"